Good morning. Thank you to all of you who are able to join me today or any day as we go through these day texts. Texts that we read usually at the start of the day, depending on where you are, of course, so that we have information, thoughts in our mind that we can either dwell upon, use, or share with others. Just depends, right? What kind of day are we having? What kind of day text? Well, today's day text is going to be especially useful in several ways. First, I'm going to get the sound right, though. Sometimes I change it. Either way, now, with today's text, in prior readings in Genesis, as those of you who followed me know or watched the videos know, we have had a lot of useful information. Information that shows intelligence, that shows an ancient description of events that preceded human existence, but that nonetheless is accurate when it comes to describing things as we observe them before anything's been done yet, like a planet that's out there that's not with any shape or form, with winds. And so the way the Bible describes things like the earth at the time before Jah began to make things like a separation, the firm expanse, light, all these things we've talked about, and then ultimately the luminaries that then become the sources of what we see as light, either directly as in the sun, the stars, or the moon, which reflects their light. All of those things are things we can share because they're consistent everywhere with what we see, and what we can show would likely have been the case no matter what the scenario when it comes to creating the earth, life, and even light. That is, in terms of the way we see it, when photons or electromagnetic radiation hit the clouds or atmosphere, and that can be given off by these sources of light. See, how did they know that was the case? Just because they were so bright? Maybe. But the fact is, they're describing things in ways that when you get further into scientifically today, they are further confirmed. They make even more sense, if that's possible. But, we perhaps know more in terms of our experimentation, and so we can see it in more detail, whereas they just saw it or were told by those who did it and saw it, like the sons of God, and they shouted in applause. All of these beings were a part of the earth's society at one time, according to our ancient biblical texts and almost every other credible ancient civilization's records. When it comes to beings who visited us, events like the flood, these are not just legends. The descriptions in Genesis of the earth, the beginning, it's not like it says that the earth was made standing on the back of a giant elephant, right? Or something that they saw as massive and capable of sustaining something big, and in a way that it was, if cosmically represented like an elephant, maybe that fit, right? No, that's not at all how the Bible describes these things. Not in any way that would be considered mythological in that sense. Like that there's some obviously incorrect description, as I just gave with the earth being made on the back of a giant elephant, or anything that you might think of that a primitive culture that's only going based on mythology would think about things they do not know. So all of that's useful to us to this point, but it's not easy to really discuss. Not usually. It's not usually easy to discuss the time when the heaven and the earth were created, although we can, right? Like I said, darkness existing, a wind from God over the watery deep. Those are things you can relate to other planets and things and their condition, light too, but they're just not easy to talk about. It's not easy to talk about photons and the firm expanse and the atmospheric part going all the way up, and then having sources of fusion reaction causing the eventual emitting of these photons that we see as light. I mean, it just gets a little heavy for people. It's good stuff. But today's text has got a lot much more simple, more easy to use stuff that I don't know why we don't use more, because it does the very thing that we want more, and that is to praise Jah. We've just forgotten or gotten so distracted by our own inventions. We, and I mean me too, we fail to realize the magnificence of creation. And that's why it's good to go through these texts. But, what it's going to talk about today and what we're going to show, in addition to everything else, I think is loaded with facts, information that we can present to people or just highlight or consider ourselves anytime we just want to feel closer to Jah. It will help. So let's talk about why. Genesis chapter 1, we're reading verses 20 through 23. I'll read the translation of the Hebrew and then the Greek. And then we'll talk a little bit about it. And then I will share some additional information that will accent what we read about in terms of the things I think we can use more easily ourselves when it comes to reminding ourselves of Jah's existence and reasons for praise, as well as helping other people. I think it's easier that the stuff that's made today, I'll say stuff, but it's creatures and things, what's made on this day of creation, it starts a more, I think, easily relatable discussion with people. Although even the plants and seeds that we talked about yesterday, I think that's also ignored far too much. So I would say the plants, trees, and seeds is also something more relatable, usable in the sense that it's not as complicated. It's not as sciencey in the technical sense that things like the atmosphere and light and things before the expanse are. So with plants, seeds, trees, and with what we read in these texts today, I think you're going to see just so much information that we've either forgotten to use or we can use more. Let's see. Verse 20, Hebrew translation. Then God began to say, the waters must abound with aquatic types of living souls, and flying creatures must fly over the land, above the surfaces, we'll come back to that, of the firm expanse of the sky heavens. Greek translation, verse 20. Then God said, the waters must be brought forth, must bring forth aquatic souls of living things, and birds flying over the earth throughout the firm expanse of the sky heavens, or sky heaven. So it came about just like that. Verse 21, then God began to create the great sea creatures and all the souls, those living, those moving about, which have been made to abound in the waters according to their types, as well as each of the winged flying creatures according to their type. And God saw that all of this was a good thing. Verse 21, Greek translation, then God made the large, great sea creatures, and every soul of living aquatic types, which the waters brought forth according to their types, and every feathery type of bird according to its type. And God saw that all of this was good. Verse 22, Hebrew translation, then God began to bless these living creatures and to say to them, you must become reproductive and become many, and you must fill up the waters in the sea, and flying creatures must become many in the earth. Verse 22, Greek translation, then God blessed all of these creatures, saying, you must increase and multiply and fill up the waters in the seas, and birds must multiply over the earth. Verse 23, Hebrew translation, then there came to be a time for darkness and a time for light. This time for light was the fifth day. Verse 23, Greek translation, last text, at least that we'll read in this grouping. So there came to be a time for darkness and a time for light. This time of light was a fifth day. Okay, let's go back and take a look at some of these texts. So first, let's talk a little bit about verse 20, and where it says that the flying creatures must fly above the surfaces of the firm expanse. And then in the Greek translation, that's the Hebrew, it says they must fly throughout the firm expanse of the sky heaven. So, okay, what does it mean? Well, it's plural, right? The surfaces. So the question here is, does this provide evidence that there's like a ceiling to the firm expanse? And if so, then does this mean that the birds are flying above it? Well, that would mean they're flying in space then, right? Or at least if someone's going to make the argument, it depends on their view of where they believe the luminaries are, actually. So without getting into that, the point is that we have to read the Bible in context, okay? We cannot make more out of it than it's saying in association with everything else that it's talking about. So it's already described the extension of sky heavens, the atmospheric part, the separation that it describes between the waters above and below, and then the luminaries that are above, and also in the firm expanse, because we see them in the firm expanse, but it doesn't say they're in the separation space between the waters. And so they are both in the firm expanse of sky heaven we see in our atmosphere, because that's where we see them, and they're in the firm expanse part of space above the waters that are above the separation. So where are the birds, right? The birds are flying above the surfaces of the firm expanse of sky heavens, and according to the Hebrew. The surfaces, that's the plural form of the Hebrew word paneh. I'm sorry, panah is the singular. Paneh is the form used here, the plural. And if you look at my shirt, I wore it today for this reason. If you look at the top, you'll see these lines, right? I wore this for that reason, because it kind of shows different atmospheric layers, in a sense, surfaces. And that's what our atmosphere is composed of, different layers and levels. They don't fly above the highest part, though. They just fly above some of the surfaces. There's many surfaces, just like shown on my shirt. And just like you'll find if you check, do any kind of search. So let's take a look. In terms of the height of Earth's atmosphere, we'll share a few things together, and then we'll get back to the texts. So, here you can see I just brought up height of Earth's atmosphere, and it gives you kind of a, sometimes when you do these things, it'll give you a little snippet. So we don't need a lot of information here. Basically quoting from this article from space.com, it states that Earth's atmosphere is about 300 miles, but most of it is within 10 miles. Okay, and there's about 5,200 feet in a mile. A little bit more than 5,200 feet. So 5,200 feet times 300 miles, and using the larger number here, that would be over 1.5 million feet high. And birds, the highest birds can fly. Let's just go to a similar thing. I just typed in a basic search here, and there is a list right here. I don't think this is the list I looked at earlier, but let's check it out. Okay, this is not the one I looked at earlier, but it shows similar information. This is from Wikipedia. We'll just go to it because this is not like a controversial thing here. We're just looking at basic, readily available information, but that accents our reading. So this is the highest flying bird, the Ruppel's vulture, and it flies a height of just over 37,000 feet. So they're in no way flying, above all of the surfaces. The text doesn't say they're flying above all of the surfaces of the firm expanse. It just says that they, according to the Hebrew, fly above the surfaces, the many different surfaces, and they do. It's just like when it says that there was a separation between the waters above the expanse and below the expanse. It's contextually referring to the firm expanse in the separation that was made. It's talking about above and below, right? So here's the firm expanse contextually. We talked about it. It's the same thing with these things. When it says they're flying above the surfaces, well, that's what it means. They are flying above the surfaces of the expanse of sky heavens, but just not all of them. We run into the same problem with Trinitarian apologetic nuts, right? I mean, they'll read Colossians 1:15, where Jesus is called the firstborn of all creation. And then when right after that it says that all things, tapanta, are made through him, they then break down, right? They immediately think, well then see, all things were made through him. He's not a made thing. Well, no, he's not one of the things made through him, right? That's why it started out saying he's the firstborn, the beginning of one's generative power, Deuteronomy 21:17, of all creation. Jah's only begotten, his imprint, all over the place. But I'm just using this as an example to show that whether it's in Genesis or here, we have people who are not going to get it. They're not going to understand what you're reading or what they're reading because they just don't. There's no real way to explain it beyond that. It could be a Trinitarian apologetic nut. It could be a scientific nut. It could be a creationist nut. Whatever kind of nut you want to talk about in terms of a person who refuses to accept the text, right? I'm not describing nuts as just other people. I'm talking about people who refuse to accept the evidence, right? I mean, who does that? Who looks directly at a text, reads it, and says, that's not what it's talking about? I know plenty of people. I can line them up for you. So do not be amazed is my point, okay? When we get to things like the firm expanse and text, and different translations or what have you that say the birds are flying above the surfaces. Yeah, they're flying about 37,000 feet, maybe higher at that time, if the birds like pterosaurs and other things existed, and could fly higher than the birds today. Well, then, but if they're trying to then read into the text something the text doesn't say, that they fly above all of the surfaces, or if someone tries to say that Jesus can't be one of the things made through him, which we agree, he's the firstborn made directly by the Father, imprint of his being. So they just can't see it. They can't. And we're not going to be able to help them, is my point. I just want to emphasize that because no matter how clear I make this here, or share the text, show the shirt, point out the atmosphere, the heights, all the things, there are going to be people that say, well, I just don't understand. This is how many feet a mile, 5280. And so now if we look at the different types of birds, okay, let's get off the whole firm expanse. There's just some things related to that, whether it's the luminaries being in the firm expanse and people who question whether that means they're closer than they are, which is not what the text teaches, as we've discussed previously, or whether it's the birds flying above the surfaces and them thinking it's like the highest ones all the way up versus just some surfaces, which is what the text says, right? That's going to come up. They're there. Here's our reading right here. You could get it in the description below, but basically we're reviewing verse 20 where it talks about the flying creatures above the surface of the firm expanse, and then according to the Greek, it makes it a little more clear in terms of, not having to show things like lines in the different levels of the atmosphere throughout, right? And so if they're throughout, they're above at least some of the surfaces, but it doesn't say all of them. But you're going to get some people, some Genesis nuts, who will make more out of these texts than are really there. Okay, so let me move that aside for a moment. Let's get back to these images because it talks about essentially, right, all the different types of birds and ocean creatures. But let's check out these birds. I remember when I started out the video and I said, all these things we've talked about to this point, the earth's condition before things were made, its non-mythical description, right? It's not made on the back of an elephant, for example. It's described as basically nothing, incomplete, without structure, waters and wind. And then you get the structure and things that we see today in contrast to other planets that may be like that. You get the atmosphere, all that stuff. Remember I said all the things we talked about to this point. And then I backed off with the plants, trees, and seeds because I think that fits here. Everything up to the plants, seeds, and trees is great evidence. It's consistent. You should use it. And you should never back down from people who want to trouble you with Genesis's creation account. No. They're in trouble if they think we're in trouble. Because everything it says fits what we can show. And even beyond what people who, like us today, could know because of the things we can do with our technology. So something else was going on. Other people were explaining these things. And because they're so accurate and descriptive, and because we know of a time when these beings called the sons of God and even Jah himself were communicating with humans that they made, well, there's nothing inconsistent or illogical about that at all. It's just a question of whether or not you see us all as a happy accident, right? Like that one article on the eclipse. Everything's an accident, whether happy or not, right? According to them. And yet we can show that everything is not. It's everything but an accident, right? It has the marks of intention, intelligence, all the stuff. And we're just looking at a couple images here. Look at these birds. Let's go to the images section. They're all over. I mean, there's just endless. And we're not talking about extinct species, things we don't know about anymore. Sometimes these things don't really provide what we want. Okay, so we'll just take a look at what we can see here. Because of the limits on the, let me see if I can get this a little more so we can get bigger pictures for you all to see on the section that's viewable. So, I mean, I'm just scrolling through a few sections, and there's more than I can take the time to describe, right? The whole show would, if I had to sit down or talk in any fashion about even just one of these birds. That guy right there, or girl, I can't tell. I could easily go over an hour. They're all of them amazing, detailed, balanced. Look at the tail. Look at the beak, the head. They're not falling over is my point. Think of T-Rex. Long tail, giant head, teeny arms. Because if his arms were any bigger, with that head and that tail, it wouldn't work. Then you have Spinosaurus, right? Longer head, snout, longer tail, fin, longer arms, balanced. All of them. I know I'm bringing up dinosaurs. You could bring up any kind of creature, really. Let's get back to the birds, though, because they're so pretty. I mean, they're gorgeous. You could sit here and stare at them. If you found this bird outside your window, you'd be what? Honey, come here. Check this out. Hey, you call your son, your daughter, whoever it is that's nearby. What are you going to do? Come here, check this out. I mean, who wouldn't want to check that out? And then you're just fortunate if it's there for a few seconds, right? So that we get to appreciate this beauty. These things are incredible. We're just looking at a few things. Let's look at a few more, though. I mean, because they're just magnificent. These things, the things that Jah allows, that he makes, when you really just, oh no, I didn't want to do that. When you break them down, you realize, okay, we have someone who's not just powerful, intelligent, but the creativity level is, I mean, he defines it. It's so odd to talk about how good of a creator he is when he defines creation, right? I mean, right? How do you, if the one who actually defined what you're talking about exists, it's almost impossible to properly give him credit. Maybe that's why the 24 elders just throw their crowns down and faceplant in heaven and just give him praise. What else can you do? He deserves it. All these things, we're just looking at birds. And we could get to so many other creatures in ways that would make you marvel. And what did I say? I said you'd have an easier time showing these things to people and sharing with them the design features. We haven't even talked about what each bird does and how they, contribute to society, all the things. And so, like I said, You can talk about the atmosphere, you can talk about the firm expanse, the luminaries, the light, all the stuff. It's there. But this stuff right here, I mean, you're looking at life now, even the plants, seeds, and trees. Once you have life around, that's just a little bit different thing. You could even point to someone's cat, right? You could point to any living creature, just like that. What else can you really conclude? And if they don't want to conclude the way we conclude, well, let them conclude how they want to conclude. You cannot force people, nor should you, to give praise to someone who makes things like this. They either do or they don't. They either get it or they don't. We get it. It's obvious, right? Oh, we have to break it down so much, and yet we really don't, right? No, we don't. They're perfect. Look at this guy, the guy right here. It's perfect. The size, the shape, all of it. It fits perfectly. There are so many colors and creatures, and yet we're so retarded as a species. We use these different features against ourselves. Well, the racist retards do, and many of the, political, morally bankrupt people do, because they know it works, right? It controls people. They're taking what Jah made and using it against us. That's disgusting. They're taking the beauty of God's creation. We were meant to do this, like what we're doing to these things right here, to us. Well, fortunately, we can still do it to these creatures. That's the good news. But for some reason, we can't do it to us. We freak out, and the second someone starts using differences against us, we start losing it. We break down. We have a harder time unless we fight against it, right? Unless we point out, unless we follow Jah and we say, no, that's not how things are. That's not how we're made. That's not how we're supposed to go. We're not supposed to fight. We're not combative made creatures. We have none of those things, none of those features. Even these creatures who have those features get along better at times than we do. It seems like. Not everyone though, right? There's a lot of us that are getting along. And frankly, when I'm not around racist retards, I always get along with every different type of human I meet. Because that's how we're supposed to be. And I almost never encounter like hostile racism. Never. Because it's just not there when it's not a part of what I'm doing or the people I'm seeing. And I'm in California, right? So I got them all here. We're all here. All the types. So it's really the stuff on TV, the racist lies, and actual, bigots and people who are just immature. And like Peter, an apostle of Jesus, someone he knew he had flaws. Peter even said, Lord, I'm a sinful man. Guess what, Peter? That's all I have. You're a racist. And I got this other person over here who's a murderer. His name's Paul. You'll meet him later. Okay, you guys are going to do this. You're going to do this work. And if you don't do this work, then quite honestly, the rocks are going to cry out and I'm going to take them over you, okay? And we'll start over. And we're going to have to then be like Moses and say, no, we'll do. We get it. We've been retarded, but we get it. Or we're around retarded people. We're going to shut them up. Whatever we have to do, everyone. Because the idea that we are supposed to go around using the differences that Jah made, whether it's in these birds or in other things, in a negative way, is absurd. And it's causing people to lose their faith. The things that are supposed to be building faith are causing them to lose their faith because we're not presenting these things and instead we're fighting over our differences. Let's talk about the ocean. Oh man, we only looked at the birds. I mean, we talked about some humans. We'll get more to the humans, by the way, when the humans are made. Now, Let's finish up though and talk a little bit about fish. We don't see them a lot unless they're in an aquarium, you know, at the stores and things. And then we're like, what? Oh, look at these fish. Every time you go to a pet store, anywhere, you will stop and look at the fish. You go to a park, a pond, anywhere. Is there fish? Look at, there's fish. It could be a giant carp, and everyone will stop and look at the fish. Okay, we marvel at this stuff. Why aren't we presenting these things more readily as evidence of Jah? We should be. We should be. Let's check it out. This is our last kind of selection on all these things. Let's start with the octopus. This guy or girl. I can't tell, obviously, with aquatic types, the gender and stuff, or exactly how that works for them. So I'm not going to get into it, but I may say he or she, okay? It's not meant to be a not necessarily gender accurate statement in this case. When we get to humans, that should be more easy to do, but we'll get to that later. I mean, I could do a whole show on this squid, and you would watch it. I would watch it, because the stuff I could talk about. I'm not going to get into all the details, because anyone can look up squid in a book or online. And I'd rather show the pictures this time. You know, previous times I showed some pictures, some facts. Here, I think they speak for themselves, right? These living creatures. Even the trees that we saw, they were beautiful. But these creatures, these living types, whether it's the birds or these types, these are Jah's creations, the things that he, through his agent, said, let these things come to be. And then once they came to be, he liked it. In my view, he liked the work the sun went. The sun knew what to do. He put it all together, just like a good carpenter's son would do too. And that's what he was also. That's why Jah made him that way, because he knew that role. These things aren't accidental. These creatures are not accidents. Give me a break, right? I mean, stop talking about these things as accidents, happy accidents, all the stuff. Like you could just randomly come up with these things. Even if you started with some kind of, some stuff. Where does the evolution, where do we credit evolution? Because it's either everything or nothing, really, in terms of coming from nothing or cross, species from new species. Because without the earth, without the ocean, without the expanse, without the sun, without the tree, none of this stuff is happening. Without the sea floral and fauna, without all the things necessary to maintain life, you're not getting life, let alone this kind of symmetry, right? I'm talking about life. How do you get a living quality in existence? Well, that's one thing. Well, how do you get all these designs and shapes in existence with the life? You wouldn't even be able to get one, let alone the other, right. Accidentally. I don't see how, because everything would have to be explained as having formed in the conditions necessary for all these things that are living to have come about. And that's just not happening. And it's not happening because it's not possible. I think maybe so some of these aren't going to give us bigger pictures. I'll stay with this stuff. But we could go on and on. When you're on a boat, if you've ever been on a boat and you've looked across the sea, wherever you are, and you see these dolphins, what do? Oh my gosh, look at those dolphins. Everyone runs over to see these marvelous creatures thriving below the waters. That is exactly what Genesis describes. The oceans are teeming with life. All of these different types and creatures. I mean, in the deep parts of the ocean and elsewhere. I mean, you want to terrify yourself. These things are there. And they're doing things that, well, some of them may not be. Some of these images I won't speak for entirely. But let me get to some more over here. There are a tremendous number of sea creatures that we get to behold, that show us the things that are described in Genesis when it comes to the types of life are consistent. They're there. They're thriving. Not just the type we see today. I mean, we can't even count them all. We're finding new species of life all the time. What about all those types of life that were there in the prior world? The types that we only could see in fossils. I mean, we're talking about so much life. Whether it's in the sky or in the sea. There's more than we can see. Without these images from other people who are seeing these things, we would never get to behold even a fraction of it all. But we can now. Just a fraction of it all. When you think about all that has existed and been around and grown and all the creatures, and we'll get to other things too, like the bird that Noah sent out, the things that he had it do, what it did, because it's directly related to the reseeding of the earth. And you're going to find out when we get further into birds. I saved that information for the Noah account. These birds are helping to bring seeds and plants throughout the earth. They have a function beyond just the different things they do with the trees themselves. They're actually helping to spread the different types of trees and plants that we have throughout the earth. So Jah's using them in these different ways, many different ways, for control of different insects and things, worms, spiders, all this. There's smaller and larger benefits or purposes, uses of these birds. There's so many birds. I mean, I couldn't even begin. I just actually kind of began. But that's about all I could do without getting way into the range of information and facts that will blow your mind. If you just pick one of these birds and study everything about it, what it does, how it works with other birds, its own kind and others, its life, the things it does each day, it will blow your mind. The same with creatures of the ocean. If you just take a little bit of time and pick one of them to study and to consider what it does as part of its environmental utility, the things that it takes and gives back to its environment, you will have enough information to share with anyone. So I don't want to hear from anyone that there's no real way to talk about these texts. How do I start up a conversation? How do I praise Jah? I'll grant you this. It's a lot more difficult today because everyone is detached from him. They're detached from Jah. And so they attribute these things, like that article I read the other day about the eclipse. They attribute them to accidents. You can't get close to an accident. You cannot praise an accident. Fortunately, we don't have to. If people want to, that's okay. People get that opportunity, right? People get to choose what to believe. As long as they're not mistreating other people, you can do pretty much everything you want, as long as it's legal in the society you're in as well. My point is, those of you who are like me and who know that this stuff is no accident, none of this is. And in fact, it points to just the opposite, in the farthest direction away from where most people exist. But that's where people are today. That's where maybe you and I were at one time because of the way the world is constructed. It's not constructed around Jah praising. It's there, all the things Jah made, but on top of it, we have all these things and people who believe other things and spirit sons of Jah who want the glory for themselves, not their Father. And so they're trying to make things potentially through us that mimic their Father, and none of it is as good, right? I mean, our planes, our trains, our cars, they're all useful. They all provide utility, but they also have a lot of consequences, and they are often misused. But so are creatures of Jah, right? They've been used in war and for bad purposes as well. So the point is, people are going to do what they want. And you can try to share with them things that will change them and help them become better. But at the end of the day, it's up to them to get better or to continue to be how they think is great. And if you know that that's how they see these things, creatures of the heavens, creatures in the oceans, plants, seeds, and trees, we'll get to you and me and other things, beasts of the field, other creatures of the earth are coming up next. But don't spend too much of your time with people who don't appreciate these texts. They're consistent with everything we can see in life and show scientifically. Try to find people who will appreciate them and who will take a look at pictures like this with you and me and understand that life exists. And it exists the way it does because someone else exists. Someone else who made this stuff. And then that's when you share with them the Genesis texts, right? It's obvious these things were made. So who made them? Well, we have ancient histories and texts that talk about these different beings. And one of them stands head and shoulders above all the rest. Jah.